Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to the channel. Honestly, I don't have a lot prepared for this writing lesson pre-show or this writing pre-show. It's not really much of a lesson this time around, but I still wanted to do it to keep the tradition alive here. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop those writing questions, or about the craft of writing, or about certain stories or movies or whatever in terms of the writing of them. We can definitely go through that. I mean, I do have some stuff that I can talk about, of course. So it's not like it's going to be just me staring at you until you ask a question or anything. But now would be a good stream for you to get those questions out, because I will be mining the chat for those that are there. Paladin Demo says, why punctuation is important. There's your topic. Got that from a tabloid. Yeah, punctuation is important. I mean, I don't think anybody would reasonably argue that it's not important, but you do have people argue. And this is one of the things that I start my semester off with my students, and that's not even technically creative writing. But I tell them, I say, writing is both thinking and communicating. You have to think, you have to know what you're going to write. That's the thinking. You have to have your ideas. But so many people just stop there. So many people think, well, I've got the ideas, I've got the writing. So editors, they handle all the communicating. There are people that do that. No, not true at all. That's not how that works at all. In fact, take that off there now. If you have the coolest ideas in the world, that's great. You've got cool ideas, but you're not writing until you can successfully communicate those ideas. Now, if you pay a ghostwriter, that's really what people are talking about. When people say, oh, an editor does that. No. They're talking about a ghostwriter, and a ghostwriter gets paid high dollar. So you've got people who will come to you and say, well, I've got a really cool idea for a story. I've got the idea. That's my half. Now you just write it down. That's your half. No. That's the writing. Anybody can have an idea. Ideas really are a dime a dozen. Every single person dreams. So every single person has a brain that comes up with story ideas. I mean, think about it. That's what dreams are. They're the things that happen to you, and you filter them throughout your day. And then you create these sort of narratives at night. Your brain automatically does that. That's the ideas. Everybody does that. Ideas aren't hard to come by. Ideas that you enjoy enough to want to create and have the sticking power with you to create and sit down and gruel over and actually structure and pace and come up with a tale. Those might be hard to find for you, but that's just because you need to find something that you can stick with. That's the real work of writing. The real work of writing is making yourself do it and sticking to it and doing the drafts and doing the revision and staying excited about an idea when you just realize that the last 10 pages you wrote need to be completely rewritten because this thing doesn't make sense now in your story. And you pull on this thread. And it's like a sweater. Oh, you pulled that thread, that loose thread that was supposed to just pop right off and be a nice whole neat sweater afterwards. What ends up unraveling half of it in the process. That's it's just the way writing is sometimes. So it's thinking, but it's also communicating. And communicating is all of that. Communicating in terms of creative writing, certainly it's sentence structure, it's the flow, it's punctuation and all of that, but it's also the order of ideas, the pacing, the tension, the character development and all of that. That's successful communications. That's what has to be learned. Anybody, especially in this YouTube community, in our community here, we have a lot of creatives, and that's great, and I love to see it. We have a lot of people who are self-taught in some ways, and that's fine, that's great. But you do have to follow out that self-taught aspect in certain ways. And when it comes to the writing portion, if you're an artist or whatever trying to write, draw your own story, you do need to have that education. And by education, I mean seeking out. Not necessarily an accredited institution education, but you have to spend time learning that. That's something that just has to be learned. There's no way around it unless you've got a lot of money and you just want to pay somebody to ghostwrite it all for you. That's the answer to that. Let's see. Scrolling down there. Did I miss something there? Back to the drawing board says, do you have any least favorite tropes of writing? Stuff that really annoys you? I don't know if I can pick out a specific trope that annoys me, but I think it's whenever anything is unearned. Gratuitous things, I think, really annoy me. So it doesn't matter what it is. It can be anything. anytime that somebody just expects you to, as a reader or as an audience member, to just accept this because they're so, you know, they got all these parts to their story or movie or whatever, and they're so excited about this part to it that they just sort of expect you to accept this other portion over here when they haven't really earned that. They haven't actually gone into it and made that work. I know that's kind of being vague and ambiguous. I'm trying to think of an example. One will come to me. But just gratuitousness. I don't like gratuitousness. I like things that are integrated. I like plots that are integrated, and you can't just have things randomly show up just because you needed something to move the plot along, you know? Maybe that's a little bit more specific. I'll think about that. Sound Engraver says, question for writing, is it best to follow a formula or structure for a genre like space opera, or can do with a experiment, or can you go with experimental if done well? Okay, so yeah, formula with let me put the question up. I need to be better about that. Sound Engraver's so good about that, putting those questions up, but it'll help me keep track of it if I can turn around and find it in the StreamYard. So yeah, genres do have certain tropes that work with certain genres, and there are certain formulas that work best with certain genres. And we all know in this community, the last thing we want to do is to set out to subvert our audience's expectations when it comes to those certain tropes and formulas. So I would say certain basic aspects of that formula, like, you know, like the hero remaining the hero. If you have an aspirational hero, don't turn them on their head at the end, you know, that kind of thing. You know, basic tenets of it, you don't want to necessarily experiment with around too much, or else you're not working with that genre anymore. But I don't think there's a problem. I think you can be experimental within a genre. I don't think you have to tell a rote tale in terms of these are the plot points, you know, these are the things that are supposed to happen and so forth. I think the problem comes when people set out to do a gotcha moment. That is another thing to answer back to the drawing board's question. You know, some things that really bother me. I hate it when a writer just wants to do a gotcha at the end, just for the sole purpose of being able to say, well, I got the audience there. They didn't see that coming. You know, we talked a lot about, you know, as much as I love Joss Whedon's work, when he kills off Wash in Serenity, completely unearned, no reason for it whatsoever, doesn't advance the plot or character development in any way. It's just because he wanted to be edgy and he wanted the audience to go, oh, because they knew they were going to kind of expect Shepard Book at that point because he's known for killing people off. So yeah, as long as you've got a reason in the story for everything that you're doing, and famously to subvert your expectations, Rian Johnson doesn't have a reason for any of that. You know, what's his reason for making Luke be an old, decrepit hermit? Because the audience won't expect it. That's it. That's all. That's the only reason he had for that. It makes no sense in the overall tale of Star Wars. It makes no sense in anything. He just got all kind of giddy all over himself because, the audience won't expect it. Won't I have pulled out a surprise for them? That's not what we come to stories for. You know, we don't want to be able to expect everything necessarily that goes on, but we do need to be able to expect certain things. So, yeah, I hope I answered your question, Sound Engraver. That's kind of, again, I'm kind of being vague without a lot of specifics, but as long as there's a reason for it in the story, I think the audience will applaud experimentation. You know, certain lines just can't be crossed, I guess. I'm going to say that. Alicia says, for $40.99, thank you, sir. I've got a writing challenge for you. Write a short story like J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson and try to make it work. Well, then it wouldn't be a short story like J.J. Abrams or Rian Johnson. If it works, that takes away their stamp on it there, actually. I mean, you can do a story with, like, you know, J.J. Abrams mystery boxes. I mean, the idea of J.J. Abrams mystery boxes, that really is born out of the Hitchcock's MacGuffin. That's really where it gets its start from. And it's not a bad idea all in all. It's just that J.J. Abrams completely and utterly hangs everything he ever writes on this trope. And it gets stale. And you can see the fact that his writing becomes just, centered around it to the extent that it, you can't expect, you know what's going to happen. You know that, this is the structure I get from that. It's like for musicians, you know, certain pop musicians, especially when they put out new albums, like, oh yes, I see you wanted to sound like, your last album or whatever, or do your signature sound. And you got other artists or bands who really try to stretch and do a little something different. Not that it needs to be different, because at the same time, I don't want to hear a country album from Aerosmith. I want to hear that rock and blues rock when I put Aerosmith on. But within that, you can experiment a bit. Let's see. Find our next thing here. Green Line Girl says, can I send you a link to an ongoing web novel since you don't get on Facebook much? Yeah, if you want to, now web novel, I'm not going to be able to look at the whole web novel, of course, but if you want me to look at a sample of your work there for the writing lesson stream, it really would be easiest if you could, you said you don't get on Facebook much, fair enough. If you could just at least jump on to throw that link up there on the thread of the Facebook group, that would be the easiest way. If not, you could email me at my email is in the stream below there, I think somewhere, and just email me the first 1 to 2 paragraphs of your work. And then I'll just make sure I put that in the next, hopefully I'll remember, me and organization, but hopefully I can put that in the next stream, and we'll do that. So there. Let's see. Troy Pacelli. You mentioned dreams being the basis for stories. The key to interesting stories is dreams that are common to humanity, the collective unconsciousness. Great. Yeah. Way to pull that full circle. That's really cool. Yeah. So dreams are proof that everybody can tell a story, or at least have the ideas for a story, telling the stories differently. So everybody can, the brain does write, period. And you're absolutely right. It's because, as people, we are pulling from our own unconsciousness, our own subconscious, but certainly our own collective unconsciousness as well. However you contextualize that, spiritually, or even psychologically vestigial, or something like that. However people look at that. Let me see here. Paladin Demo says, have you seen a hurricane come to Missouri? Is that the name of a story or something? No, or a movie or something like that? No, haven't. That's a new one to me. Let's see, Owen Lister here has a idea. I think a writing trope I've come to hate now is to deconstruct everything. It's nothing but deconstruction of basic storytelling nowadays. Deconstruction can work, but it's abused. Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's, the whole channel is kind of the mantra of that. But you're absolutely right. Deconstruction for the sake of deconstruction. One thing to think about as a writer, when you have an idea for a story and you want to tell a story, that's good. You need to think about your themes. That's one of the things I talked about last time. Think about your themes. The kinds of themes that you tend to tell tend to come out in your work, definitely. But then there's the idea of what is the message that you want to convey. Now, this is subtle because you do not at all want to start from the idea of message. You start from your idea of a story, and you let that story organically tell itself. This is what, Hollywood's been doing lately and still does, is they start with message. Okay, we want to get across this message. How can we manufacture a story around that message? That's the absolute wrong way to do it. But as you're writing a story, and especially as you become a more prolific writer in your own right, you'll get to know your work. Just as you get to know your themes, you want to try and get to know certain messages or values that tend to creep out in your stories as well. And that's something, as your story takes shape, I think just like with themes, it's important to sort of take note of what message your story's sending. The reason is not so that you can tailor the whole story around that message and just make it because that's what propaganda is. That becomes propaganda. That's not writing or not an organic story. But if you do take note of what kind of message your story's sending, then that can help you avoid what you're talking about there on a list of the deconstruction. So if you're building up to this one moment, well, let that moment take center stage in the end, and don't just try to subvert it in the end just because, that kind of idea. So yeah, I 100% agree with you there. Definitely. But I was originally planning today on reading a bit of that Fall of Mithrisis fantasy / sword and sorcery ish novel, just to give some examples of my own world building. the intros of it and everything like that. As we've been looking at Dune and looking at Dune's world building. This is my I don't know if I ever showed my copy on camera before, but the old Sci-Fi Book Club copy. It's pretty sweet. It's a nice size and everything for the print and whatnot too. Good for making notes in the margin. But we talked about Frank Herbert's great, job of world building. So I was going to do that. It's interesting. I don't know if that story. I love the story. It's just such a short story writer that every time I get going on it and gaining traction, I'll get stalled in rewriting what I've already written. And I've written about half. I've written it as a good novella. That's where it ended, as a novella. But I know that if I can write the second half to it, which is in my brain there, then it would be a pretty sweet novel. And actually, it's one of those cases where I actually did write a good portion of the second half, but then lost the files. You ever had that happen to you? That's really discouraging. And I still got basically what happens up in my head, but that's just like, oh man, really got to go back and rewrite all that. So I get stalled in that story a number of ways because I'm used to that gratification from being a short story writer. You spend a certain amount of time on one tale, then that tale's done, and you get to go send it out, and get feedback on it and get readers and actually send it out into the world. So yeah, that's that. But I'll get around to it, and maybe next week if I can fish it out and have the time to really look at it properly, we will go ahead and share that with you. So let's see. Green Line Girl says, "Lucky, yeah, lucky me. I do live in a good place weather-wise. It's good with mountains around and certain things like that. Yeah, other than the power going out and the Wi-Fi going out." Let's see. Sartorical again. You almost had that happen, but then you remember that you had it saved on another flash drive. Yeah, I try to do that, especially now with the clouds and stuff like that. I'm always saving to a cloud or to a thumb drive, or emailing it to myself. But at one time, I just wasn't, and especially when I was working from a number of different computers, and I had that one trusty thumb drive. I made the mistake of trusting it all to the one thumb drive, and that thumb drive died or got lost or something like that. I forgot exactly how that happened. So, yeah, Big Al presents. You left me hanging on Polymithrisis. Yeah, Big Al's my first reader, so he reads all of that stuff that I sent, and he was giving me great feedback. As Al does, he's really great for typos and continuity errors and stuff like that. And I just kind of stopped and left him hanging for it. But I'll get back to it, Al. It's coming. It's on my brain right now. Working on it and stuff and trying to fish it out. So it'll happen.